ethanol is something which we drink for fun. So in a 3-ounce can of tuna, there's roughly the same amount of elemental mercury as there is ethyl mercury in vaccines. Hi friends, I'm Philip, a medical doctor and PhD student here in Croatia, and on this channel you can join me on my journey through medicine and science. I believe that another common cause of fear or confusion in the context of vaccines comes from claims regarding mercury. I'm sure you've seen a news article or heard someone talk about how parents should essentially be scared for their children's health due to mercury in vaccines, which could cause mercury poisoning or autism, which is something I talk about more in depth in this linked video. But essentially the message usually tends to be that we should be scared of mercury in vaccines. As always, the sources of information which are mentioned in this video will be in the description, so you can check them out. I want to first start by talking about two different types of alcohol actually. There's methanol, which looks like this chemically. This is the structure of methanol, and it's better known as wood alcohol. And in the context of human health, it's very toxic, very dangerous, and has negative side effects such as blindness and even death. On the other side, there's ethanol, and it looks like this. You can see that its structure is very similar to methanol. There's just a little variation there, but ethanol is something which we drink for fun, which is found in every store-bought alcohol, every spirit, etc. So obviously it's important what type of alcohol you drink. And just to be perfectly clear, don't drink methanol. Now let's talk about mercury. For me, when someone says mercury, the first thing that comes to mind are those old thermometers which I carried around the house with the utmost attention and care, because breaking them was very bad and it was very high on the no-no list my parents gave me. So the mercury which is contained in these types of thermometers is actually called elemental mercury. That's the type of mercury, and it looks like this. Just Hg, no special CH or any other groups, just Hg, the elemental mark for mercury. Of course, that isn't the only type of mercury that exists. There's also methyl mercury, which looks like this, and ethyl mercury, which looks like this. The difference between them, as we can see, is very small, and similar to the alcohol example, the methyl mercury is the type which is more toxic and more dangerous to our health compared to the ethyl mercury, which is much less toxic, much easily eliminated from the body, etc. So clearly it's very important what type of alcohol or mercury we consume, because not all types are the same, they don't have the same effects on our health. And we can lean even further into this analogy between alcohol and mercury and say that it's important not just the type of alcohol or mercury which we consume, but also the amount. As little as 10 milliliters of methanol is enough to cause blindness, whereas a glass of wine which has ethanol has about 25 milliliters of ethanol. And I think it's fair to say that most people would drink a glass of wine without worrying too much for their health, because it's a different type of alcohol and it's a small amount of alcohol. Similarly, mercury in small amounts and in the type that's less toxic, so the ethyl mercury, doesn't have negative impacts on our health. Usually the amount of ethyl mercury which is found in vaccines is about 25 micrograms. And just for reference, 1 microgram is 1,000 times smaller than 1 milligram. So 25 micrograms of ethyl mercury is usually found in vaccines, so it's a very small amount. For comparison, around the same amount of elemental mercury, which is more toxic than ethyl mercury, is found in a simple small can of tuna. So in a 3-ounce can of tuna, there's roughly the same amount of elemental mercury as there is ethyl mercury in vaccines. Now, since ethyl mercury exists in nature, it's not just added to vaccines, it exists regardless. There have been cases in history where people were overexposed to it, so exposed to very high amounts, and that's how we know what amount of ethylmercury is needed to cause a harmful effect. And in fact, this quote taken from the FDA's website tells you that the amount of ethylmercury needed for there to be a harmful effect on our health is about 100 to 1,000 times larger than the amount that can be found in vaccines. In other words, in order for the mercury in vaccines to have a negative impact on your health, you would need to take 100 to 1,000 injections of a vaccine at once. Whereas, of course, you only take one injection. The thing that a single dose of a vaccine can cause with regards to mercury is a minor local reaction. In other words, minor redness and swelling of the injection site, which isn't by itself a large cause for concern. I'll put a link in the description where you can see a list of all vaccines used in the US, along with all the components which are found within those vaccines, so you can check which vaccines have mercury and which don't. And in fact, from that list you can see that the vast majority of vaccines used today in the US, for example, don't have mercury at all. This is because mercury is required to be in vaccines only when there's a multi-dose vial. So when multiple doses are taken from the same vial, for instance, for influenza shots. Okay, so when the vaccine is located in the vial and it is used for the first time, a syringe is placed, a vaccine drawn and a shot given, and then for the next patient a new syringe is taken and drawn from the same vial and given to the second patient. Now during this repeating process, there's a small chance that some bacteria or fungi can end up inside the vial with the exchange of syringes. So mercury is added to sterilize the vial, to kill those bacteria or fungi, so that it couldn't be possible for bacteria or fungi to be injected into the patient. That's the role of mercury in vaccines and the reason it exists in vaccines at all. But this is only required for vials which contain multiple doses. Most vaccines today are given as a single dose and are contained in vials which only contain one dose, so there's no need to put mercury inside them. Another reason that most vaccines don't contain mercury today is that during the 1990s, FDA, the World Health Organization, and other institutions sort of took a precautionary measure to reduce mercury as much as possible in vaccines, among other things. This was due to some concerns raised with people who were overexposed to that more toxic methylmercury. Since ethylmercury, as you saw, is very similar in structure, it was taken as a precautionary measure to reduce it in vaccines, even though there was no evidence of harm by ethylmercury. And in fact, this data and this conclusion has withstood the test of time and multiple additional studies which were taken since then. And we now know that ethylmercury is in fact much safer than the methylmercury kind. Still, this might be confusing. Why reduce the amount of mercury if it doesn't cause any harm? One of the reasons was that the amount of ethylmercury which was in vaccines would ideally be compared to the minimal harmful amount of ethylmercury, right? So if you had a sort of cutoff and said, okay, if you have less than this amount, there's no harm. If you have more than this amount, there's harm. However, this cutoff was not known at the time because there were no data about it. So the same cutoff was used as the one for methylmercury, which is more toxic, okay? So when comparing the amount of ethylmercury in vaccines at the time, the amount was actually still below the cutoff point for the amount of methylmercury which would cause harm. But there were some possibilities that with the various vaccines in existence and various weights of children, that there could be a possibility of a child receiving the total or being exposed to the total dose of ethylmercury, which would be greater than this known cutoff point for the amount of methylmercury, if that makes sense, right? So that was one of the reasons why reducing mercury was recommended. Another reason was that even at a reduced amount, ethylmercury could still have this effect of killing bacteria and fungi. So for example, in this reduced amount of 25 micrograms, which is what we see today, it still has this effect on killing bacteria and fungi, so reducing it seemed to make sense. Since then, there have been additional studies, and today the FDA, CDC, ECDC, and other institutions all support the position that ethylmercury is really non-harmful in the amount it can be found in vaccines, in the amount found in vaccines. Now, I know I've thrown a lot of information at you in this video, and if you take away one thing, I hope it's this. Most vaccines today don't have any mercury in them. However, a better question than is there mercury in vaccines would, in my opinion, be what type of mercury is in vaccines and in what amount, and is that amount enough to cause harm to our health? Has this information about mercury in vaccines been useful to you in any way? Let me know in the comments, and check out my other videos about vaccines, and don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell. Thanks, and I'll see you later.